Hey everybody, welcome to the Raw Online Report. And this is an actual report, not just a basic interview. We have today, of course, very long time, over 20-year contributor to Muscular Development magazine, esteemed internationally recognized lawyer, expert in all matters of PEDs, supplements. And right now I have to go to you for your expert opinion. Please welcome Rick Collins, Esquire.
Thank you, Ron. Great to be with you, man. Thank you for having me on. Yep.
Yeah, well, we got an emergency situation here in the
I
US.
hear, yes. Yeah, it's burning. The internet's on fire.
Yeah, the internet has been. I'm like the last guy to put out a video on this, and it's probably for the best because everyone else has made some errors in the reporting because they didn't all have you. Only a couple of people had you. So on March 1st, the DEA published a proposed rule in the Federal Register titled "Telemedicine Prescribing of Controlled Substances when the practitioner and the patient have not had a prior in-person medical evaluation." So immediately, everyone who's on TRT, everyone who owns TRT clinics, there was a mass hysteria. People went to the Chicken Little response, the sky is falling. They're taking our TRT away. And this is
Right.
significant because this is a few years ago. 2.91% of all men in the US over 40 were legally prescribed TRT, and it's 3.75% for men over 60. So this is affecting millions and millions of men here. And the concern is, this is what everyone read into the wording, and perhaps you're going to correct this. Yes, you will, I'm sure. The worry is that, okay, we get our TRT through a clinic, like I use this one, Frontline, out of Texas, but now we're going to have to go to see a doctor every 30 days to get a refill, which is outrageous because nobody goes to refills anything at prescription. I have stuff for my hair. I have prescriptions. I don't have to go to a doctor once a year just to see my doctor. So clarify the issue, Rick, if you would. What is actually in this proposal, and what is likely to happen?
Right. So first, notice that right in the title of the rule itself, it says for situations where there has been no in-person meeting with a doctor, no in-person medical evaluation. So anybody who's seeing a local doctor, who's seeing somebody physically in their state and on TRT, in that situation, this rule doesn't even apply at all. So what percentage of people are doing that? Well, I'm not sure. There are a lot of people who are on TRT with local doctors, endocrinologists, or you live in a state that's local to where the clinic is. If you live, there are a lot of clinics in Florida. Certainly, if you live there and it's convenient, then it really doesn't apply to you at all. As far as the 30-day thing, yeah, I've read that, and I've heard some, influencers that I think were credible, who are saying and repeating this line that every 30 days you're going to have to go in person, fly to whatever state the clinic is in, and meet with the doctor for an evaluation. Number one, that would make absolutely no sense, right, in the context of TRT, certainly. But number two, that's not what it says. There is absolutely nothing in the rule that says that the patient needs to go and see a doctor every 30 days for a refill of testosterone. Again, I repeat, it is not true that a patient needs to see a doctor every 30 days for a refill of testosterone in a situation where they have never seen the doctor, never had a medical evaluation before. That's not true. So
why is everyone how did that get so misconstrued?
So there is something in the rule that says that if you haven't seen a physician or a practitioner before you get prescribed the testosterone, that you can only get 30 days in that initial prescription, and then you need to see a doctor for a refill. So you need to see a doctor within the 30 days. And it doesn't mean that you need to see the doctor who's prescribing for you. You can see a different doctor. You can see a doctor local to you, and that doctor then can interact with the prescriber, wherever the prescriber is, and fill that prescription. And once that's done, the 60-day mark comes, you don't need to see a doctor. The 90-day, you don't need to continue seeing the doctor. Now, is that in and of itself burdensome? Sure it is, and I guess if you're a TRT clinic that has set up a system in which you never see patients, well, then you're going to need to, it's very bad for you, and you need to reevaluate your business model. I think what we're missing is the context under which all of this is happening. Because the other thing that I hear a lot online is that the whole purpose of this proposed rule by DEA is to crack down on and destroy TRT. That's what this is about. That's the point of it. And, you know, we live in an age where everybody's got their own narrative, right? And so we look for situations, the old confirmation bias, right? We look for situations that confirm our narrative, our world belief. So if we believe that testosterone is under attack, and you and I have talked about this before, and testosterone both physically and metaphorically is under, right? Masculinity in many ways is under attack today. So I can certainly see how, if you're strong on that narrative and you believe in that narrative, and I think both of us do, it would be easy to take this rule and put it into that bucket and say, here's further confirmation of that. And so the idea that this is a rule by DEA to attack testosterone is something I'm reading a lot about, but it's wrong. It's not what this is about. And in order to really understand it, you have to look back at what this rule is. What's the purpose of this rule? How does it factor into what the law says? So I'm going to give you the brief little history of this, right? So you and I both know that in 1988, Ben Johnson ran really, really fast at the Seoul Olympics, right? 100 meters, broke the world records, tested positive for Winstrol. People in Congress went nuts because they saw this as the potential end of sports, that it's just going to become a chemistry contest. And so we need to get steroids out of sports. And in 1990, Congress took the action to categorize anabolic steroids, including testosterone, right? And to put them all into the same Controlled Substances Act as heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana, narcotics, traditional drugs of abuse, right?
Yes.
That happened in 1990. And, you know, we've talked about that before too on our podcast. And I think both you and I think that was a bad move by Congress. That, number one, it wasn't supported by the evidence or the facts at that time. And number two, it did more harm than good in a lot of ways. A lot of people got arrested. I've represented probably more people arrested for anabolic steroid crimes than any other lawyer on the planet. And it sucks. It's a lot of people who are otherwise very law-abiding people, good people, productive people in society, maybe too productive, right? You're not laying in an alley with a needle in your arm from anabolic steroids. There are other drugs that have those problems, including social blight and the destruction of families. Testosterone, steroids, not one of them, but it is what it is, right? That's what Congress did. So it was Congress, interestingly, led by Joe Biden, then Senator Joe Biden, who was the cheerleader for making anabolic steroids and testosterone controlled substances. So now we cut ahead to 2008. This kid named Ryan Hyatt gets Vicodin from a online clinic, from a doctor he's never met, who's never evaluated him. He's 18 years old. He overdoses. He dies on the Vicodin. So Congress takes action, and they create a law, the Ryan Hyatt Act, in 2008. And what that law basically says is, look, if you want to get these online drugs, these controlled substances, and they're thinking of Vicodin, right? They're thinking of opiates when they do this. If you want to get them online, well, you got to see a doctor before you get it. Before you get it, not 30 days after you get it. Before you get that prescription, you need to have a medical evaluation in person. And the idea is, if it's some kid, if it's an addict, if it's somebody who's going to hurt themselves, well, at least with this law, it puts a guardrail on these kind of pain mills that were existing online. Okay, so that's 2008. One of the exceptions, and there are some exceptions, most of them don't apply to TRT, but one of the exceptions is if there's a global emergency, kind of a national emergency situation. So in 2020, January 2020, the DEA says, look, under these circumstances, we are going to suspend the enforcement of the Ryan Hyatt Act so that now patients can get their online prescriptions, and we're not going to go after situations where they haven't seen a doctor during this emergency situation. And so during that time, that act was suspended. But I can't imagine anybody thought it was going to go on forever. At some point, things end, right? And the government has decided, for whatever reason, that May 11th of this year is when that emergency comes to an end. And so DEA, which enforces the Ryan Hyatt Act, has to decide, well, what do we do when this emergency ends? Do we go back to the way things were before, which was that you have to have an in-person evaluation prior to the prescription being written and filled? Or do we make some allowances? So the DEA is proposing to make some allowances to allow people to actually get a prescription, even in a situation where they have not first seen a doctor or had a medical evaluation, but within 30 days, they want you to get it. So again, the law and the DEA's perspective on this is really focused on painkillers, really focused on what this law is all about, which is not people not overdosing, right? But because Congress made testosterone a controlled substance, testosterone is lumped in with all these other drugs. Does it belong there? No. I don't think testosterone ever should have been a Schedule III controlled substance. But now that it is stuck in this same category, the same law that puts the Ryan Hyatt Act in a situation where it affects it, where it controls it. And so, look, is the get a prescription and in 30 days, a doctor has to check you out. Is that appropriate for Vicodin, for opiates? I don't know. I guess that's debatable. Some think it is. Maybe it'll save some people. Maybe it won't. Not my circus, not my monkeys, right? But as far as TRT, does it make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. The rule shouldn't apply to TRT. And if you're angry about that and you think that it doesn't apply or shouldn't apply, well, then, I'm with you. And that makes sense. And some of the rules and the exceptions and the nuances that are in the rule, the proposed rule, don't make sense. I mean, they're unwieldy. There's more record reporting and record keeping and a lot more red tape, which again was intended for painkillers and Vicodin and kids not overdosing, but now it's being imposed on the TRT prescription. And again, doesn't make sense, overly burdensome, not good. And so I can see how people would not like this if you're in the TRT community and want to push back on it, and that makes sense. But not liking something doesn't mean that you can then completely misstate the facts about what it's doing in order to either galvanize the base, to rally people, rally them based on the truth. Don't rally them based on nonsense, that you've either made up or you've heard some other influencer say it, so it must be true. I don't know if the people who are saying this are just misinformed or if they are just so into their narrative that they can't see anything other than government hates TRT, so this is all about TRT, or whether it's just clickbait, right? I mean, maybe, the people who get the most followers are the people who are the most outrageous in what they post sometimes, and maybe that's what it is. But that's sort of how we got to where we are.
So this is my concern here. I know from my own experiences, from a lot of people that I know that are on TRT, a lot of us have never seen a doctor in person. We did a Zoom call, maybe it was a phone call. Initially we had blood work done. Then we followed up with a doctor. I think in some cases, maybe it was even nurse practitioners. So a lot of us never have seen a physician in person. We haven't been evaluated face to face. where does that leave us? Does that mean we would have to see someone just maybe one time to establish that? Or yeah, because you're talking about if you've seen a doctor at least once, you really have nothing to worry about. This isn't going to affect you in any way. But how is it going to affect a lot of us out there who have never seen a doctor in person? It's only been telemedicine.
Yeah, well, it's definitely going to impose, some inconveniences for sure, because you are going to need to either see that doctor in person at some
Mhm.
point, or see a doctor local to you who interacts with that doctor. There's one of the ways that the DEA is proposing to make it a little more convenient for people is that you don't have to see that doctor. So let's say your doctor's in Florida or in Texas or whatever. You don't need to go there. You can go to a doctor who has a DEA license in your state, wherever you are, and interact with. So that doctor does the evaluation, and the Florida or Texas doctor can then rely on that evaluation to make the prescription. Again, once that happens, then you're good. The problem, though, is that it requires kind of a live two-way audio visual interaction with you and all the two doctors together with you. It's a big pain in the ass, right? It's inconvenient, and it's going to be hard, at least in the beginning, to set that structure up, to find a doctor who's able to do it, willing to do it, and interact with your Florida or Texas practitioner.
Same
So
time as you're being
yes, it's got to be kind of an all-in-one kind of thing.
wow.
It's a pain. So again, the details of it are problematic. Maybe it makes sense for Vicodin, maybe it makes sense for opiates, but for TRT, especially 30 days, where what are you going to know in 30 days, right? I mean, it doesn't really, it's inapplicable to TRT, and that's really the problem. And interestingly, the DEA, if we go way back, the DEA, when the people in Congress were looking to schedule testosterone and anabolic steroids in the late 1980s, the DEA sent witnesses to Congress who said, don't do it. Doesn't belong there in the first place. Interestingly, right? So the DEA was actually saying it shouldn't even be part of any of this. And it was Congress. So if we're really looking for the bad guy in all of this, and certainly there are aspects of this rule that are overly burdensome, especially with respect to testosterone, almost certainly ridiculous in some regards with respect to testosterone. But if we're really looking for why this problem is here in the first place, you got to look at Capitol Hill. That's where the problem started. And interestingly, there is now a proposal by a couple of senators to take testosterone out of the Controlled Substances Act in the first place.
Wow.
Why? Is it because bodybuilders want it? Is it because hypogonadal men have a strong lobby in Congress? Absolutely not. It is because of the trans community. Interestingly, the trans community has become very active in opposing controlled substance status for testosterone, under the idea that a person who is assigned female at birth, who is looking to either become male or simply to progress along the non-binary spectrum to a more masculine phenotype, that those people are being unduly, unfairly, unconstitutionally thwarted from from seeking and getting the treatment that they need, because of the restrictions and burdens that come along with controlled substance status. Now, whether these bills and these proposals will have any legs, I don't know. The trans community has become very active and very successful in making cultural and policy changes. And so, strange bedfellows, right? The MD community and the trans community have a common goal here in many instances to kind of rethink whether testosterone belongs in the Controlled Substances Act. And so far, just to be clear on it, the proposal doesn't include DECA, Winstrol, Tren, so we're not going to be lumping those other things in. but it does affect testosterone, and that could be at least a glimmer of hope for some future reevaluation of whether testosterone in particular really belongs as a Schedule 3 controlled substance under federal law.
I mean, like you said, I don't see too many parts of town where there are people sitting in alleys strung out from testosterone and they've lost their families and their jobs and everything. But the one thing I want to ask you, it's a proposed new rule. So this isn't something that's a definite. This has to be voted on by Congress at some point. When's this all going to happen?
So the comment period that DEA has offered is basically what was the month of March. So it was proposed on March 1st, and it was seeking comments. The agency sought comments until March 31st. So they're now going to look at all of those comments and decide what changes need to be made. I'm sure that many people within the TRT community reached out to criticize the rule itself or specifics of the rule, some of the record keeping burdens and other red tape with respect to testosterone. Will DEA rethink it? The same agency that said testosterone and steroids shouldn't be in the act in the first place? I don't know. I would like to think that reasonable minds would say, we need a different standard. Maybe this rule is sensible for painkillers, for Vicodin, for, opiates. But with respect to TRT, we're going to make it a different standard where maybe it'll be 6 months, or maybe it'll be some relaxation of some of this overly burdensome details of this proposed rule. But again, it doesn't become an actual rule. DEA has rulemaking authority given to them by Congress, but ultimately this will be evaluated. What that time period is, I don't know. There is something in the proposed rule now that gives some grace period. I think it's a 6-month grace period that if you got your prescription during this emergency term, that there's a longer period of time. But I could see how TRT clinics that have set up business models where they've never seen a patient are going to really need to do some soul searching about how they can make it convenient to continue to see their patients if there are thousands of miles between them and the patient.
Yeah, so this is not something Congress needs to vote on. This is the DEA has the authority to just decide we're going to implement this.
Yeah. So Congress has given rulemaking authority. So all of this rulemaking is under the Ryan Hyatt Act. And so that act has specifically already given the DEA authority to implement the specifics of how to, enforce that act. And so we're going to have to see what comes of this. In addition to kind of writing to DEA and commenting to DEA, Congress also needs to rethink whether steroids or specifically testosterone should be treated in the Ryan Hyatt Act in the first place, or whether it should be in the Controlled Substances Act, which, dates all the way back to 1990.
I honestly believe it's going to be the trans community that they're the only ones with the potential to save the day here, because they have a lot of political clout now, especially with the political climate we're in right now, the culture of the United States. But so it sounds like the worst case scenario, if this goes through, this proposed rule, is that people will have to see a doctor once. There's no chance, it doesn't sound like, that they would ever be enforcing a 30-day refill visit. That's outrageous. No,
they're not even proposing it. It may be that every 2 years or something like that, you've got to get an in-person follow-up medical examination. Look, a lot of, and we both know that there's kind of two schools of thought on TRT. There's the progressive clinics who, at some point, some of them think you should never have to see a doctor at all. And then there's the more conservative endocrinological groups, standard conventional orthodox endocrinologists. Many of them don't think anybody should get testosterone unless you've got the levels of a 90-year-old woman. But they would say that you shouldn't get a testosterone prescription absent some initial evaluation ever by a doctor, under the theory that, well, you could have some, you need a digital rectal exam. You could, have some issues. You need a testicular examination. There could be some massive, grapefruit-sized growth on your testicle that nobody's going to know about unless so that is the more conservative view. And, I don't think if Congress or the DEA were to say, okay, well, let's get the opinion of the standard orthodox endocrinology folks, I don't think that they're going to be supportive of the idea of exempting testosterone from ever being prescribed without an in-person. I don't think that would happen. I don't think that's within the way that most endocrinologists think. Even though I think a lot of endocrinologists don't maybe know all that much about testosterone. They focus mostly on estrogens and women's hormone replacement and thyroid issues and prescribing Synthroid. Testosterone, I think, is not within the scope of many endocrinologists to the same extent that it is in the view and study of the clinics, the TRT clinics.
This is why the clinics are such a booming business now.
Right, because it's hard to find sometimes a doctor if you live in a certain state, in a certain area, particularly rural areas in America. I'm not sure you can find an educated, open-minded physician who's going to say, okay, you need 100 milligrams or 200 milligrams of test a week. I've heard, we've both heard horror stories where the doctor wants to give a shot of 200 milligrams once a month, spike up the levels, and then the guy crashes. I mean, so yeah, I can understand why in practice people would want to go to clinics that may not be local to them just for the expertise and knowledge of those clinics.
Yeah. Just real quick, Coach Greg Doucette, he's a influencer, over 1.5 million, 2 million subs. He said, he's in Canada. He said, now you guys know what it's like to live in Canada, because the vast majority of physicians in Canada will not prescribe. They're not comfortable. They have very little education on how to do it, the dosages, so they just shy away. So yeah, hopefully it won't come to that, but it sounds like the worst thing that could possibly happen here for all of you guys who have never seen, you're on TRT and you've never seen a physician face to face, is you're probably going to have to do it once, correct?
Yeah. So I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying there aren't a lot of problems and that we shouldn't push against it. To me, I guess, yes, that, number one. Number two, that this isn't specifically designed for testosterone or cracking down. Yeah, I do think the government doesn't like TRT. And one of the examples of why I say that is the black box warning on testosterone, which was put into effect a few years ago by FDA. Basically, that testosterone causes cardiovascular problems and all of these, heart attack and stroke. And the reality is, as you and I know, and probably most of the viewers know, low testosterone, the absence of testosterone, having very low levels and not being on TRT puts you at greater risk of these sorts of cardiovascular events and other problems. So, and the research that they used to support that, many doctors who are more educated and enlightened say it didn't say that in the first place. So I understand why this rule is put into that narrative, but a takeaway from this on this and lots of other issues is that we have to be very careful about just immediately knee-jerk reacting to things that happen and immediately throwing them into the box of our pre-existing narrative, and and believing that in the absence of actually, wait a minute, let's look at what this actually says. Maybe it supports it, maybe it doesn't, but we've kind of lost critical thinking, and it's time to get that back.
I want to let everyone know that in the description, we'll have a link to your newest legal muscle column titled "Is DEA's Proposed Rule the End of Online TRT Clinics?" And you wrote it up so they can take a good read at that. Also encourage everyone to follow Rick on Instagram at Rick Collins ESQ. That's short for Esquire. Rick Collins ESQ on Instagram. And the website, if you ever need an attorney for anything related to these matters, if Rick and his partners can't help you, he can certainly direct you to someone somewhere in the world. Steroidlaw.com. You guys can remember steroidlaw.com. That's where to find him. Rick, thank you so much. We're doing this on a Sunday, guys. He took time out of his weekend for this, so much appreciation, sir.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
All right. So thanks, everybody, for watching Raw Online Report with attorney Rick Collins. We'll see you next time. Hey, did you like that video? Smash that like button, subscribe to MD, and please comment down below. Thanks for watching.